So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to this side event on corporate sourcing. I'm very pleased to see so many friends and partners and colleagues and a few new faces in the room. My name is Henning Wüster. I'm Director of the Knowledge, Policy and Finance Center of IRENA. IRENA has been the operating agent of the corporate sourcing campaign of the Clean Energy Ministerial, which is coming to a conclusion here at CEM9. But we were very happy to collaborate with many partners, the three lead countries of the campaign, China, Denmark and Germany, and I want to express my appreciation for their support, very much for the also for the financial support from Germany that made our work possible in this regard. But we are also pleased to collaborate with many other partners, many corporates and many institutions, and it's a long list, so I better look at my notes for that. We've had RMI working with us, the Center for Resource Solutions, the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator, RE100 under the lead of the Climate Group and CDP, the Resource Platform, WBCSD, WRI and WWF, and I see I've at least recognized most, if not all of them here in the room, so very happy to see you, and certainly the work that I'm presenting to you today has very much benefited from input, from comments, from the collaboration, and I very much hope that we can also take it forward in that spirit, because for us this is a start of a new phase and not the end of work on this topic. But what I want to present to you is based on a new report that we are launching here today, a report that provides to you market and industry trends on corporate sourcing, and it shows that the landscape of corporate sourcing has really moved on quite phenomenally over the last 2 years. Corporate sourcing now is featured in over 75 countries, either through PPAs or through utility green procurement programs or through energy attribute certificates. And you see the map here. This originated very much in Europe and North America, but we see a rapid increase in Asia, in Latin America, and also some countries in Africa joining, and I shouldn't forget the Pacific and Australia, who are becoming more and more prominent in this field. We've looked in preparing this report at data submitted by about 2,400 companies. This benefited from input from CDP that had a survey of company data and very much complemented data that IRENA had itself. We've clearly seen a tremendous development over the recent years, driven to a large extent by an unprecedented reduction in the cost of renewable energy technologies, but also driven by a desire of corporates to increase their sustainability, to reduce their carbon footprint, and last but not least, enabled by policies. So renewables have become a very attractive source of energy, and many of the companies do it because it's good business. The number that we have put up here is 465 terawatt hours. in 2017. That is a remarkable number because it's almost the electricity consumption of France. It represents 3.5% of total electricity demand in the commercial and industrial sector, and 18.5% of the renewable electricity demand in that sector. So it's not huge, but it's also an interesting share, and it's growing. That's most important. When we look at volumes, the production for self-consumption is the most common sourcing model. That is then followed by purchase of unbundled energy attribute certificates, and thirdly then followed by power purchase agreements. In the report, we are presenting an indexing of companies that looks both at the share of renewables and at the total volume. It's important to note that corporate sourcing happens in various sectors. It's actually quite a widespread and dynamic phenomenon, and much of that was not known to us. It took us to some extent by surprise. You have to be aware that the data that we are using here was reported in 2017, so it basically dates back to 2016 data. So even in the period since then, things have moved on, and we are probably already further than what we are showing in the report, or we are surely further than what we are showing here. By volume, the majority of renewable electricity was consumed in the materials sector. That's shown here in gray, and these are companies in the iron, steel, aluminum industry, but also in pulp and paper. The highest share of renewables was consumed in the financial sector, 24%, and in the IT sector, 12%. And the IT sector, I think the companies in the IT sector are most prominent, and there you can find some of the leaders, such as Microsoft, that is at almost 100% renewables. In terms of self-generation, shown here in blue, we have some interesting companies like East Japan Railways, but also IKEA, that are very prominent in actually putting in place renewable energy generation capacity themselves. But what is important is that we have to look forward, and we have to use the developments of the recent years and accelerate them in order to advance towards the targets that countries have set and that the world has set through the Paris Agreement. It's interesting to note that the potential is indeed very big. I mean, we've done some very basic calculations to come up with what we believe is the potential for corporate sourcing by 2030 and 2050. This starts with looking at the share of the commercial and industrial sector, which is today about 2/3 of the world's end use of electricity. So it is quite significant, and it is essential in decarbonizing the global electricity sector to mobilize investment through corporates. When we look at the current number of 465 and project that to 2030 or 2050, then we would get to about 2,150 terawatt hours by 2030 and 3,800 terawatt hours by 2050. But that would be a mere 20% of the electricity consumed in the commercial and industrial sector. So it's far from what we believe is the cost-effective potential for renewables in this sector, and that is by 2050 85%, which would be equivalent to some 19,000 terawatt hours. So a huge potential for growth, perhaps a challenge, but I believe that it's actually an opportunity. And if you look at the companies that have set and have actually reached high levels, then they are in almost all the sectors, and there are a large number of them. So we've counted 111 companies that have reached levels of between 85 and 100% renewables, and 50 of them actually have reached already 100%. So this shows it's feasible, and there's no reason why other companies cannot follow that. And I should mention that we've just before lunch had a very interesting ministerial roundtable joined by some CEOs and other corporate leaders, and there clearly the message was that acceleration is necessary and possible, and some of the participants, and those were not the NGOs, but they were actually from the corporate sector or from the policymakers, said 100% by 2020 should be a feasible target for many of the companies out there. So I see there is room for ambition and potential to scale up. The interesting discussion then also went into integrating large shares of variable renewables and moving into the end-use sectors, using smart grids, digitalization, which again many companies see as an interesting business model. So just some food for thought and for perhaps for the discussion. But let me conclude my presentation with some of the recommendations we are making in the report, also for the discussion then to pick up. The first set of recommendations directed at companies. In our survey, we found that half of the 2,400 companies we looked at actually source renewable electricity, but only 17% have targets. So that indicates that there is potential for more ambitious target setting. Clearly, more companies can set targets, and many of the companies that have targets, their targets are expiring by 2020, and hence there's a potential and scope to look beyond 2020 and then set more ambitious targets. Moving to the public sector, some recommendations for governments, and pleased to note that these were formulated together with our CEM campaign partners. First one, to ensure transparency and accountability, to establish a strong system for issuing, tracking and certifying energy attribute certificates. Secondly, to create a market structure that allows third-party access, so allowing direct trade between corporate buyers and developers. Thirdly, to encourage utilities and electricity suppliers in general to offer options for corporates to source directly renewables. Fourthly, then to stimulate direct investment in the production for self-generation. That can, for instance, be done through improved interconnection but it also would happen through net metering policies that will allow excess electricity to be fed into the grid. And fifth, and certainly not last, to remove the uncertainty for investors by giving full transparency on the enabling regulatory framework, on administrative requirements, and on the financing options that are available. So here also to mention, and that was again something underlined in the discussion we had in the ministerial roundtable, is that national targets can be a very important signal to companies to join with setting corporate targets and then be more ambitious in moving this forward. So this just some ammunition for the discussion, for the panel. As I said, we do not see this as the end of our work on corporate sourcing. For us, the implementation has to start now. That has to be the priority. We are clearly eager to work with countries to advance on the recommendations that we have made, but we are also very eager to continue working with our partners, some of which will now join us here for the discussion. And with that, I want to conclude, and I'm very pleased to introduce to you the moderator of our panel, Ms. Helen Clarkson, who is the CEO of the Climate Group.
Thank you.
And hand over to her. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to take my place here. You can see we've got a long table. We've got some great panelists who I'll introduce in a moment. So our mission at the Climate Group is to accelerate climate action, and we do this largely through bringing together powerful coalitions of businesses and governments, getting them to make a really ambitious commitment and then pushing them to both deliver on that. And we use comms to celebrate success and inspire more action. And this is really a key year, we think, for climate action. For those who don't follow the UN process minutely, but I'm sure lots of people here at this event do, but we're halfway between 2015, the Paris Agreement, and 2020, when we need governments to make their next round of commitments and really step up their ambition. And we know that one of the things that will give the confidence to do that is companies and others taking action in the real economy and saying, we can do this. So we're really pushing for that real action, and it's why we launched RE100 and its sister campaigns in the last few years in partnership with CDP. RE100 is a global initiative, and it's so dynamic and growing that I've been handed an emergency bit of paper with the latest two joiners who've joined us today. That's the pace of change. So joining RE100 today are the Crown Estate. I believe if you watched the Royal Wedding, you were looking at some of their territories, is that right? I think they own that. And Yonan Shinkenbank, who maybe owned the rest of it. But anyway, those two companies join us today. If you add together all the companies in RE100, you get to 170 terawatt hours of electricity demand. So it's the equivalent of a country. We calculate it around the 23rd biggest country in the world. That's the demand. So it's a huge market signal for renewable energy. So that's where we come from. And then we've got this amazing panel who I'm going to invite to join me on the stage. I'm now going to horribly mispronounce the names, but let me call to the stage Martin Schoep, who's the head of division for the International Energy Corporation at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. Efrain Villanueva Arcos, who's the director of clean energy for the Mexican Secretary of Energy. So two governments who are going to be quizzed by corporates and then probably push back on them. And then we have Virginia Covo, who's the global director of the supply chain sustainability for Anheuser-Busch, AB InBev. Mars Hanna, who's the senior lead for global energy markets at Google. Daniel Nathan, the senior director of revenue at Ørsted. Flemming Sorensen, the senior category manager for energy at Novo Nordisk. And last but not least, Harry Vahar, the head of global public and government affairs for Signify. So we're all going to squeeze in. I hope no one ate lunch. Great. And you will get your opportunity to quiz these fine people. But while you're thinking of what you would like to know, I've got some questions for each of them. And Virginia, I'd like to start with you. So you're at the beginning of your journey, a commitment made in 2017 to source 100% of your purchased electricity from renewable energy by 2025. Can you just talk us through this journey? What made you decide? What's the journey ahead of you? Now, I've been told you shouldn't lean into the mic. You should all relax and lean back and not feel you have to. So there we go. That's the instructions I passed from the technical people.
Helen, thank you so much. Very excited to be here representing AB InBev. For those of you who are not familiar with us, AB InBev is the world's largest brewer. Helen, for us, sustainability and taking action to fight climate change it's a must. It's essential for us because we rely on natural ingredients to brew our wonderful beers that our consumers enjoy. So like our CEO says, sustainability is our business. So it's embedded in our culture since years past. So it just made sense to make this commitment. In addition to this, we're present in 50 countries over the world. We have over 200,000 colleagues working worldwide, and we work very closely with our communities. So we know that we can make a big impact in the world. So that's also what made us do this commitment. And as part of our 25% carbon reduction target that we launched in March of this year, having renewables is also something that will help us achieve that goal much faster, right? So we're attacking that in 3 different ways. The first one, of course, like I mentioned already before and everybody knows, we signed up for RE100. Basically, what we're doing is shifting around 6 terawatt hours of electricity into renewables, and we're looking to do this through additionality into the system. If you look at today, we've already transformed 30% of our electricity into renewables, counting Mexico was our first country, and we're almost there with the US, and then we have a couple of other countries and others coming forward. We've done that in majority through PPAs and some on-site.
Great, thank you. And can you just tell us a bit, some of us, I don't know if anyone was in Davos and was summoned to the top of a mountain and given a nice hat with the logo. Tell us about the logo that you launched this year.
So yeah, that's another one of our approaches. So we know we reach millions of consumers every day. So if you look at Budweiser, which is the flagship brand that actually adopted the symbol of 100% renewable that you will see in every label of Budweiser, we sell 41 million Budweisers every single day. So we have this opportunity of inspiring our consumers. So that is why Budweiser decided to adopt and kind of champion this logo that says, it's a little battery that says 100% renewable electricity. And the idea is to celebrate, just like you said a while ago, to celebrate when each country reaches that percentage for Budweiser. It's already present in the US, so you can see it in every store on our Budweiser, in the labels, in the cans, and this will roll out into other countries as we reach that 100% goal.
Great, thank you. So look out for that if you're drinking Budweiser in the US.
Yes.
Fleming, you already source more than 3/4 of your electricity from renewable sources. You've got a target of 100% for 2020. As a Danish company, was it important for you to mirror the leadership of Nordic countries on renewable energy, and how's that sort of played out? Tell us a bit about that aspect of it.
Well, I think as a Danish company headquartered just a few kilometers from here, we acknowledge the leadership of other Danish companies within technologies that help drive the renewable energy transition. Was that the primary reason for our commitment and our ambition level? Probably not, but obviously we'd like to extend the leadership we have, not in the a slightly more
Thank you. Harry, people are used to you being referred to as Philips Lighting, Signify, so if you're confused about that. Harry and I also seem to always end up on panels squished very closely together, so there's probably pictures out there looking very similar. But anyway, tell us, Philips Lighting was a real pioneer on sustainability, and you've really led that. You were an early member of RE100, and you're now 3 years after making your 100% commitment. What's changed over the last few years, apart from the name?
Yeah, the name changed last week, but then now maybe just a few words on the whole integrated approach that we take. So we deeply believe, I think as all of you, that we cannot be successful in a world that fails. So the largest part of our program that we started over 10 years ago is then how do we transition the whole lighting sector. So lighting used to be in 2006. In December that year we called also symbolically for the phase out of incandescent light bulbs, which are most abundant, also 2/3 of our sales volume, imagine, just a little over 10 years ago, and now they're almost gone. But at that time, lighting was 19% of global electricity, and to make a long story short, at COP21, 2 years ago it was 15, and in 2030 it will be 8. And while at the same time, the number of light points globally will grow between 1/3 and 50%, so really completely decoupling energy use from, let's say, the service that we need. But then also we felt we need to walk the talk, and that is why we made a commitment at COP21 to become carbon neutral in 2020, so 2 years from now, and we joined RE100 because of course we need efficiency and we need renewables to do that. So in 2016 we fully moved to renewable electricity in North America, last year in China, and we are something like 70% on our way of bringing our own footprint to zero. Then also, I see some of my friends of what I call then, the third area is what I call the energy efficiency domain, because we know efficiency has to do between 1/2 and 2/3 of the job of keeping us below 2 degrees centigrade, and that is why, also with my friend Clay Nessler from Johnson Controls, a couple of years ago we proposed to the UN to create the energy efficiency accelerator platform, so that also in other sectors, buildings, transport, appliances, industry, district heating, we do the same. So in a way, you could say then our own footprint, we bring it to zero by 2020. Our work in the lighting sector, so where we really work, you could say our handprint, but then also collectively working together, you could say for the bigger blueprint of moving the world to within the boundaries of the Paris Agreement. If we then look, maybe one thing that I really want to bring up on PPAs. So actually our team, so we have a sustainability team who are already working for many years on this, and there's really one improvement area on PPAs to make us move faster and to go, you could say, from RE100 to RE1 million. And that is that we need to find a way to make those agreements more flexible. We fully understand that initially, then okay, it's 10 years, fixed price, or actually also to secure the investments that were made in wind or solar, mostly. But then, yeah, normal electricity, you can switch every day from utility, from supplier. Rates are flexible. You can buy a lot. You can be a small customer. So we think that also with renewable energy sourcing, we should find a way to bring in that flexibility. So in volume, in timing, in rates, so that it becomes actually the first normal energy, the first normal electricity, and that we move from RE100 to RE1 million, and eventually even more. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you tell us a bit about developing RECs in the Gulf region? I understand that's been a...
So yeah, I'm not fully involved in that, but we are the first company that moved to renewable energy certificates in the Middle East, because then of course you also, for like I think most of you, for business and logistics, for business travel and logistics, we need to compensate. There's no other way that there's some fossil fuel use. So indeed, so we I think end of last year, we agreed to move also in the Middle East as a first company to do that.
Great, thank you. Mars, Google's been a pioneer on renewable energy sourcing, and you confirmed a few weeks ago that you matched 100% of your electricity consumption with renewable energy in 2017. So you've got a very ambitious strategy. Can you just tell us a bit about that and how you got to that?
Absolutely. So we've had a goal to purchase 100% renewable energy for our global operations since around 2012. Helen, as you mentioned, we announced a couple weeks ago that we have achieved that goal as of end of year 2017, which we're very excited about. We purchased over 3 gigawatts of wind and solar around the world. in Northern Europe, Latin America, all across the US. And we do this for a number of reasons. Number one, we believe climate change is an urgent global problem that needs to be addressed, and mitigating our carbon footprint is a priority that comes from the highest parts of Google. But we also do this because we believe it makes good financial sense and good business sense. If we can take an energy source that has a zero marginal cost profile, and we can place that energy on our bill at the data centers, that allows us to hedge our electricity expenditures. And when you purchase over 6.2 terawatt hours of electricity a year, that security makes a big difference. So we're very excited about the achievement we've been able to announce so far, but we're really just getting started. Our business has been growing at about, the load has been growing about 20% year over year between 2010 and 2015. So we have a lot more work to do simply to stay at 100. And then more importantly, this 100% we refer to internally as our first 100%, because it is a global definition and an annual definition. Over the course of an entire year, somewhere in the world, we are purchasing as many megawatt hours of renewable energy, both bundled certificates and physical energy, as we are consuming somewhere. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have renewable supply on every single grid where we operate, and it doesn't mean we have a load following source. So going forward, we need to move away from this global annual match and towards a regional match. We need to have 100% renewable energy on every single grid where we have a facility, and we need to eventually move towards a world where we have actually a 24/7 clean energy supply around the clock. That's where we'd like to go. We've got a lot of work to get to that second one first. And then we couldn't agree more with Harry that the need here is really to move this beyond 100 companies and to 1 million companies. And I absolutely agree that making PPAs more flexible, making the market more flexible is a key provision for taking this beyond 100 companies and to thousands. Companies need to be able to do shorter term contracts, 1 year, 5 years. They need to be able to have more flexibility to sign these quickly and re-up their contracts in future years. And in a lot of markets around the world, that being able to achieve that is going to require some changes to the regulatory structure.
Great, thank you. So some really good examples of leadership and ambition there. A recent Bloomberg report looked at the first 130 RE100 members and calculated that they represent a $94 billion investment opportunities by 2030. So you can see where the scale of the opportunity is here and how we could start to meet these commitments. That's only those 130. So when we get to I'm a bit nervous about the RE1 million. That sounds like quite a lot of work, but very excited too. Let's turn to the governments and start with Mexico. You've been through extensive energy sector reform recently, adopted some ambitious target for renewables in the power sector, opening an energy system to new market players. Where do you see the role of corporate sourcing within that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And I want to mention that Mexico, as you probably know, the first reform for allowing private sector to participate in generating electricity was in 1992 with an independent producer for energy. No, it was 1992, and for those years, Mexico doesn't have any targets for clean energies. So mainly was a cogeneration, combined cycles, but that was the first time that large companies in Mexico began to deal with the electricity and with energy. And since 2013, Mexico established a really huge energy reform and opened the market. So it was like the big opportunity for large companies and small companies to participate in the Mexican market. So I just want to mention that Mexico right now is completely prepared for accept all these recommendations that you just mentioned before, because we establish a credible and transparent system trying to attract the investments from the private sector in this market, a new market in Mexico. We create this market structure as well. We provide a good regulatory framework for understand and for participate in the new market. We ask the national utility. We already have just one in Mexico, a big one, that comes from this constitutional monopoly that we had in Mexico just in 2012. We are stimulating the participation and production for the private sector for the generate electricity and to obtain benefits from the new scheme. For instance, for clean energy certificates, that means a good incentive for investing in clean energies. And the other important issue that we already have is that we are trying to remove the barriers to participate for the participation of the private sector. So we launched just recently with the support from GIZ specific guidelines for making the companies in Mexico to better understand which will be the benefits to participate in the market. And we have been working in kind of workshops trying to attract the large companies that already have experience in Mexico for having clean energies to show the way for other companies in Mexico, small, medium-sized companies, to really mark how is the pathway for having more clean energy in Mexico. So we already have all these policy, legal framework, regulatory, so we are really prepared to have more participation from the private sector. That's the reason that Mexico participate in this campaign, and I expect that this campaign will continue in some ways, but because I understand that this is the end of this campaign. But we are willing to establish in Mexico a certain kind of campaign to continue working in this sense. So we already have guidelines, we already have a legal framework, we already have policy targets. So it is a good moment in Mexico for having this good partnership with the private sector.
Great, thank you. Martin, can I ask a similar question to you about the German government and where you see the role of corporate sourcing in meeting your targets, but also a bit about the EU and how it fits into that picture?
Well, thank you, Helen, for inviting me. Good afternoon to everybody. Let me first start in thanking our Danish and Chinese colleague, not present here currently on the scene, because it was a joint effort under the CEM working group on wind and solar energy. And also a big thank you to IRENA, who just presented the outcome as a technical expertise here on this very important topic. And last but not least, of course, congratulations to all the representatives on the scene here with representing companies that have very much committed to renewables as their sourcing of energy. From a government point of view, as my colleague Efrahin already said, there are two elements. One, we can push it through support policies, and we also can encourage and welcome the pull effect from demand side. And that's also a very important element here. Let me stress three factors that we see very important for this type of increase in renewables. One is, we think that liberalized energy markets is the best environment for all companies to source themselves from the market, from renewable sources. Be it at other levels, from the high voltage level to the low voltage level. A market that is open and free, like the market regulation reform that Mexico underwent, is an optimal environment and basis for all these types of contracts that companies may engage into to get sourced from renewables. Second, either it is a direct production and consumption, the so-called prosumption, or it would work through certificates. In the first case, if it is the first direct linkage between production and consumption, there's one element we as a government have to be aware of, and that's that on one hand it saves or may save grid infrastructure costs or amounts. On the other hand, none of the companies will completely cut off the grid. So the grid becomes more and more an assurance issue and has to remunerate it in that way. So in the case that all the grid issues are just put on the utilization of the grid, on the kilowatt hours, that may in the long run and in an increasing share of that consumption market be a risk that we have to be aware of with other models of payments for the grid infrastructure. On the other hand, if it goes to certificate schemes, so physical disconnection of the production side and the consumption side, we are very much in favor of having a clear additionality effect there. Or the other way around, we would like to avoid to the extent possible a greenwashing, where we rely on existing renewable generation capacities and just put your green paint and color on your business. So any type of certificate has to clearly show and demonstrate the additionality wherever that new generation may be placed and may be built. I think these are the main objectives that we pursue as a government.
Thank you. And then Daniel, hi, down on the end. You surprised commentators in 2017 during the German offshore wind auction by offering to build offshore wind plants by 2024 that would rely on the market power price alone. So now you've heard from buyers here about their plans to expand sourcing. You've heard from governments about where that fits. What's your perspective on all of this and as corporate sourcing as a commercial opportunity?
Hi, welcome everybody to Copenhagen, I should say, as coming from Ørsted, originating and based in Denmark, but obviously becoming a global company in the energy space, in particular offshore wind, and thanks to German colleagues, it's also where we can talk a bit about offshore wind in a subsidy-free environment. To the question, yes, last year saw the first of potentially many offshore wind farms being awarded, and I guess we can also say built, on a completely merchant profile. So in other words, no form of subsidies. It's true that the grid will be built by TenneT in this case, but as such, the wind farm will operate on the complete merchant terms, similar to what has been seen on other technologies elsewhere. But we took the first step, and we did that last year. We also just successfully, a few weeks, a month back, got an additional volume on the same project. So in essence, in the German part of the North Sea, there will be in 2024 a wind farm of 900 megawatts, which will equal roughly 4 terawatt hours of production annually, on a complete merchant view. That is, of course, as one would say, a bet on power prices. It's also an opportunity, I would turn it around, for us to say that we are, of course, looking to secure off-take routes for that, as we are now getting into the planning mode of that. So in line with what was just mentioned, this is additional in the sense that we will build this wind farm in the context of us ensuring that there's good off-take routes to it. Amongst my responsibility of overseeing all our revenue activities in Ørsted and in our offshore wind business, this is clearly one of our priorities to ensure that that wind farm and many other wind farms that is currently on the map across our pipeline is actually capable of being built with support of corporates. What obviously makes offshore wind different is the size. Whilst you would not build a wind farm of 50 megawatts offshore, you would probably build it more at 500 megawatts and above. It clearly is a different game. It clearly also has a different profile around it, but it nonetheless is, in the end, no different for corporates or any other sourcing power. It's just a different technology with a different production profile. But if you look at it, it's also an extremely stable and also a type of technology that will last just as many years as you've seen on onshore solar. So in that regards, it's not a fancy new thing from a sourcing perspective. You see it as any other form of power. So we feel very certain, and we have many players that we currently speak with, and we are aiming to close some of the first deals in the upcoming period here, that there is a huge potential, especially in Germany, a lot of industrials in Germany, with the need of this, and also with the way the system is designed in Germany. You clearly are in need of projects like the ones we are having on our hands to actually secure, if you want to go the certificate way and not producing on-site, for your own need, that you would actually need a wind farm like this. So we very much welcome the development.
Great, thank you. I'm going to come to the audience for questions in a minute, but first I just want to dig a bit more into these barriers and opportunities and what the report's about. So we know that we saw the map before, we know that the uptake is increasingly global, but it has so far been pretty concentrated in a small number of countries, and then specific strategies like corporate PPAs are even more concentrated. The report shows us that the barriers to renewable sourcing for corporates, the problem they mostly cite is policy. So let's just talk about that a bit, both from your perspectives as buyers. What have you found? Do you agree with that barrier? Can you give us an example of somewhere that's really enabled you? And then similarly to the governments, what policies have you implemented that's worked really well? So let's just look at that barriers and opportunities bit. And I throw it open to whoever would like to go first. Fleming and nodding.
Yes, I'm happy to respond to that.
Great.
When you look at a global footprint, and Novo Nordisk does not have the most complicated of footprints compared to some of our big colleagues out there, but you come across immediately that everything is done differently in each country. And we've sort of, and different opportunities are available in different locations around the world. So we've done two things in our work. One is we've adopted sort of a portfolio approach where we'll accept to buy certificates, unbundled certificates in some places. We'll accept to, we'll do more leadership-oriented activities such as PPAs, or even direct investments in other places. And we've also implemented sort of a regional way of looking at how we can complete our RE100 target by 2020, because some of our locations are immature when it comes to renewable electricity opportunities. Our load in those regions or those countries is small, so we've come up with a solution where we will look at it from a regional perspective. And a specific example is that we, from 2020 onwards, we will source, we'll engage with a new European opportunity, a new European project. We will source power from that project, have it delivered physically into our facilities in Denmark and in France. But we will also, on a certificate basis from the same facility, cover our consumption in Russia and Algeria. Those are two specific countries where we have facilities, and we're building new facilities there, but there are no readily available opportunities for us to source renewables. So how can we, in the short term, cover our need, and that's how we've chosen to do that. We've built in flexibility so that in the longer run, when opportunities and some of these barriers have been brought down in those countries, we can switch to a local solution.
Thank you. Harry.
Yeah, so we spoke about some of the barriers, which are mostly in creating the flexibility to make this the main type of electricity. But maybe two ideas to make this move faster. We all know we need to do efficiency plus renewables. I sometimes say energy efficiency plus renewable energy is decarbonizing twice as fast and twice as cheap. So maybe also in the package we can include also some guidelines or tools to combine both. Because also on the efficiency you have a payback, and that can also for part then afford for any renewable investment that you make. And a second suggestion, and I don't know if this is already in consideration, but this is a corporate commitment program. But what about the public sector? Could we create also RE100 pillar for subnational governments? And I can imagine if then cities, states and regions start joining, as soon as you have a few, I think then also there the number will quickly increase. Because for parts because it's what they want, I think more and more want to do anyway, but also political leaders who do this will more and more be seen as future-oriented by today's voters, and certainly by future voters who are growing up, and one day also will reach election age.
Great, thank you. Yes.
I would echo what Harry said. For us, barriers, I think I would repeat again what everybody here has been mentioning. Technology, availability, and policies are the main barriers that we find in some of the countries, since we operate in such a varied range around the world. We see that as one of the main barriers. And obviously, when those become available and regulatory backbone is there, we see benefits and savings for us as a company. We believe in just adding additionality. We don't, so we're not looking for solutions in the short term of not going that way. So I would echo what I said before, that Harry was saying, that we need some support from the public sector as well.
Anyone else?
I just concur with most of the statements that have already been made on this. I think policy and regulation is absolutely the biggest barrier for us to meet and maintain our 100% goal over time. We need three things. We need access, we need claims, and we need reasonable cost of renewable energy. And access, we are a technology company. We want to be a buyer of renewable energy, which means we want to be buying at the retail level. Where there are large liquid RTO markets or integrated wholesale markets, we can be a buyer and a reseller to a vertically integrated monopoly retailer. But our experience has been that the quickest and most effective way to procure renewable energy is the markets where you have a very large integrated wholesale grid underneath the system, and then you have an open competitive retail market on top.
Great. Daniel, and then let's go to the floor. Yeah.
No problem in Europe, honestly, for us seen as a developer of offshore wind projects. There are differences between the markets, and some obviously have a larger, let's say, competitive supply of certificates or similar, so you as a developer would look at it in a way where you say that's a very liquid market. And then we have markets, and I can point to one which I know is a bottleneck for many corporates, which is Taiwan, as a very good example. A lot of high-tech companies, a lot of supply chain to high-tech companies, Google included. We are there. We're going to build a lot of wind farms there. Government is fully backing that up. We would love to much more link that production with the supply side. And I can say as a developer, we struggle to get government attention around that piece. They have introduced some form of certificate market that does not work in the sense we understand from the corporates. And in many ways, we are very, very willing as a developer to use our access, and I guess some corporates access on similar levels in government, to actually form more alliances around what would be the best way to make a certificate market work for us to actually direct that power that we produce rather than it goes into the grid as it is, that it could potentially have, let's say, an additional means to certain players rather than just being something we simply offload into, in this case, Thai Power's grid, and then it becomes what it is. It's a dialogue we've had with several of Google's addition to other RE100 companies. Just echoing that, I think there is some collaboration to be had in certain markets to break those barriers between not the corporate going themselves or not the developer going themselves.
Let's take some questions from the floor, and then maybe we can pick that up as well in the answers. So who's got some? Yes, let's have a question there. Do you need a microphone thrown at you? There. That's the 10-minute bell. So think of your questions quickly.
Yeah. Thanks, Al. Is it working? Yes, okay, I'll try only to use 9 minutes on this.
And then at the end, say, it's not really a question.
Kasper Garlak from the Danish Ministry of Energy, Utilities and Climate. First, I want to thank the partners on this campaign for all your efforts. I didn't wish to squeeze into an already crowded panel. And we, as governments, we are well represented also by our German colleague. Just want to say that this is a very important area for us, and I also want to link it a little bit to other discussions in the CEM, where it was just agreed over lunch by ministers to launch a new initiative on investment and finance within the CEM, which is supposed to work across relevant areas, and we both have actually. Both Mexico and Germany joining that initiative. So we'd be happy to look at how we can help take this issue forward in that context, because that's going to be an ongoing initiative that will be open-ended. So very happy to look into that, because it's obvious this is a key area for that work. And then there are many issues you could comment on, but I just want to raise one point. That is already being mentioned also by Ørsted, how governments and suppliers of renewables and investors and the end users might be able to collaborate on some of the key regulatory and market framework issues that are important to make this happen, because that's That's a cross-cutting message I get out of this. And I know there are some initiatives in that regard to make that integrated approach, including a clean energy investment initiative by NREL and other partners. So I just want to, could there be an interest in taking a closer look at that? We already heard that GIZ is already involved in some of this at the country level. And we also work bilaterally with a number of emerging economies.
Thank you. Bruce, you on there?
Thank you, Helen. Bruce Douglas from Solar Power Europe and the Resource Platform. Fully agree, more flexible deals, simpler transactions, but clearly the biggest barrier is policy, and the complexity partly comes from the policies. In Europe specifically, we're now negotiating the clean energy package and should be finalized in the next month or two, which will be critical. So there is a window of opportunity now to get that right, which will be critical for the next 10 years of corporate sourcing. Our understanding is off-takers need the claims, need the certificates in order to do the deals. The clean energy package as it stands and currently probably will land allows member states to do pretty much what they want to do, are currently doing, which allows them to either not issue certificates to subsidized projects, cancel the certificates, or auction them, amongst other options. What's the panel's view on that? And in that time frame between 2020, when the implementation will come through, to when we can provide subsidized projects across a range of technologies and a range of regions, there's a sort of valley of death where certain markets will continue to struggle to have PPAs signed.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Efrain and Martin to respond to those two questions. And
yes, well, I just want to mention that in Mexico, we have an energy transition law that demands us to have the planning documents for the roadmap for having more clean energies in Mexico has to be implemented with the participation of private stakeholders, academia, NGOs, and subnational level as well. So we already have this mandate that comes from the law, and we established the Consultative Council for Energy Transition, where we invited the private sector, and all the regulatory situation, policy, we always have been discussing with the private sector because we are interested in, as you mentioned, to build all these new scenarios in Mexico with a strong participation from the area or the people that will invest in this new open market in Mexico. So we are interested in having all these partnership with the investors, with the local governments as well. And in that sense, we have been really committed to have this dialogue with the private sector to understand which are the barriers that you are facing. And we establish a good relationship with some of the companies that has a strong commitment with this direction for 100% of renewables, etc. And we are trying to attract them to Mexico in order to have a good example for other companies that existed the way to have a huge amount of renewables, but it comes as well for the target established by the Energy Transition Act.
Thank you. Martin, I'm going to give you the last word. They'll come and ring a bell at you at some point, so feel free to talk till that happens.
Well, regarding the guarantees of origin, certificates of all in Europe, they are under. The open question there is whether they also harmonization to what extent they make it part or not of the quantity. That was in the past a very tricky question for what reason that was completely separated at European level. That was a topic of the member states. For what
Great. Thank you very much. I think the hand is appearing. Right on cue. Very good. It's like a game show. Someone's written on here, summarize the conversation. I will not attempt to do that because it has been wide-ranging, and I think you'll agree, very rich. So I will commend to you the report that we're here today, and I think there's a really clear signal here from everyone, from the market, and particularly to the policymakers here at the CEM, about the need for really supportive and enabling policies around the world. So thank you very much to all our panelists for your insights today. Thank you.